Let's pray. Lord, your word is sometimes very challenging, but help us to make sense of it as you lead us by your Spirit today. Thank you that it is a book open to all, freely to read, and it reveals your purpose and love. Thank you for your word, a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. Amen. The world has been transfixed this week by the fate of a small submarine, missing for some days apparently, with 5 people on board. And some people I spoke to found it very difficult with the images of people trapped in a small place like that for days on end in the dark. It was quite overwhelming. And then the news came that it had imploded on the first day actually, and some found that a relief that those people didn't stay in the dark in that desperate state, that their death was quick. But there are other interesting things that as we look at that whole scenario and the way the world is focused on it. Barack Obama, interviewed on TV on Friday, pointed out the inconsistencies, as many of us had already thought about a few days ago, between the world's response to this disaster and the relevant indifference by many to the fate of hundreds of young people trapped in a boat that went down off Greece, refugees that died, unnamed, unknown by us. Great debates will continue, no doubt, about money wasted on these and other ventures like space exploration, for one. You could probably come up with a list of things and ask the question, couldn't that money have been put to better use? On your chart, I imagine, you would try to measure the relative value of things. And it's very challenging. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher and theologian, tells the story of some thieves who broke into a jewelry shop and stole nothing. What they did was swap the price tags around. So the very expensive diamonds were dirt cheap, and those made of cheap trinkets were very expensive. Great bargains if the store policy is to sell things at the marked price. Would have been a good day the next day. But it raises the challenge. What makes things valuable? Now this text in Matthew 10 continues a discussion about discipleship. It's quite a challenging text throughout, actually, the whole chapter. Not so long ago we looked at Matthew, the tax collector, who followed Jesus and walked away from his job and his wealth in his tax collector's booth. And Jesus was annoyed, if you remember. His critics complained because he valued having dinner with sinners rather than eating with the political or religious elite. So the value of things. What's more important? Status, keeping the rules, and being knowledgeable, being wealthy and apparently successful because you've got a job, or apparently being in disgrace because you've done something wrong, or less educated, or you are friends of sinners who are also loved by God, or you are from the margin or poor in the world. It's very hard to quantify wealth. Jesus got it right, I think. I was talking to a lady recently who introduced herself to me by saying, I'm only 39, you know, meaning 93. And then she told me that she'd lost everything in the August flood where we got wet here. Everything in her rest home unit. The water came up and everything went out the door. And it's been a tough couple of months, well, 6 months for her. And she tried to put her life together again. But then she told me that on that afternoon, she was so excited because she was going to see all her 12 grandchildren that were coming to visit her. Then she explained to her, I've got one daughter married, a lovely son-in-law, produced 3 children, and each of them has produced 4 children. See? 12. Great, eh? There's the value. She didn't really seem that perturbed that she'd lost all her stuff. In relation to submarines and shipwrecks, it was reported that 11 millionaires went down on the Titanic. A Canadian, a Major A.H. Pearson, who had crossed the Atlantic some 40 times before then, left apparently probably $200,000 worth of wealth and money in his cabin as he escaped. And he wrote later, the money seemed a mockery at the time. He later said, I picked up 3 oranges instead. Great example. I think it is in the late 80s that a Russian exploration team, submarine team, picked up some stuff from the Titanic and found his wallet. And inside his wallet were some tram tickets that he bought to catch a tram in New York or wherever it was. Lost their value, kind of. Didn't get them anywhere, did they? So what about Jesus' teaching here? Is this seriously the same Jesus as the Sunday school version that some of us got in the last millennium? I think we were there in the last millennium, some of us. Is this still a training exercise for the 12, or does this apply to us? I think it's both, actually. I think if it was a training exercise for them, as they entered into the state of being a persecuted church, we certainly have a lot to learn from it. Remember that by the time the Gospels were written, and they were written down later in the letters, it was already quite tough to be a Christian. Persecution was real. From the time of the stoning of Stephen, approved by Paul as he held the cloaks of people, and the Christians scattered, Paul at least was making it his business to destroy Christians. And in time, the Roman Empire also made them kind of illegal citizens, because they wouldn't say Jesus is Lord. I mean, they wouldn't say Caesar is Lord, rather they would say Jesus is Lord. There's a great story of Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, who was in his 90s also. And the Roman soldiers arrested him because he would not say Caesar is Lord. And they tried to persuade him. It's just a couple of words. And he said, I've served him all my life. How can I deny him now? He said, can I pray first? He went upstairs. He prayed for the whole world like Mark. And not quite the whole world, but a lot of things. And then he came down and they took him away. And he was burnt at the stake. So it was a tough time. So when Jesus' teaching was taken on board and kind of digested and processed at that time, it was quite good to have the Gospels in their original form. In Matthew 10:24, it starts here. Remember last time we talked about the disciples becoming apostles for the first time, being sent out, and they come back and report. Now there's a teaching about all the disciples. That's us too. A disciple is not greater than his teacher, or a slave greater than his master. It is enough for the disciple to become like his teacher, and the slave like his master. If they call the head of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they call the members of the household? Now, Beelzebul is a very interesting name. They accused Jesus of casting out demons by the head, the prince of demons, Beelzebul. Baal-zebub is a similar name in the Old Testament, the god of Ekron. The name literally means Lord of the Flies. William Golding's book, of course, but it also means Lord of Dung. It's got some interesting names. The point is, whatever they call you, it can't be much worse than saying to Jesus, you're doing this by the power of the Prince of Demons. You're going to be called names. That's what I call Jesus' no surprise policy. I warns them. Don't fret. I was called this. It can't get much worse. The worst that's happened to me this week is someone whom I met on Wednesday at the meeting said, oh, I was told you're on death's door. I said, oh, if I am, it's pretty good to be here. I'm fine, thank you. See, gossip and rumours are very interesting, aren't they? But we don't really have too many people insulting us for Christians, for being Christians. Okay, so don't be surprised. The no surprise policy. Now, this is his special offer. I think this whole thing is a special offer for Christians. Thinking of the price of things, swapping prices. Deal one is don't be surprised. Deal two is don't be afraid. In verse 26. Do not be afraid of them. Who are the them? The ones who will persecute them. For nothing is hidden that will not be revealed, and nothing is secret that will not be made known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the housetops. Fascinating. But I think the first part is really cool. It's excellent news. All the liars will be exposed. Nothing is hidden that will be revealed, and nothing is secret that will not be made known. All the bosses who are bullies, all the bulldusters, that's another B word, and all the rest who make up stories in the dark, secret things they whisper, will be made known. I think that's cool. You don't have to take revenge on anybody if you want to throw something at them. I remember Rob Bell, who was a preacher talking, he did the Numa videos years ago. There were a series of teaching videos, and he used to tell stories and about revenge. He said we all have that a little bit in us, especially in traffic. You know, you might have noticed that. And he said in his case, he had a car with a sunroof, and he was very tempted to, when someone would cut him off, to drive in front of them, open the sunroof and throw golf balls out to see if it would hit the car behind, you know. Fascinating. Excellent discussion on revenge. I used to use it to teach teenage boys what to do, you know, because their first response was hit first and ask afterwards. Two of them once had an argument outside my door, and I opened the door and they literally fell in because they were fighting. And it turned out that the one had insulted the other's mother. And he apologized and made peace, and they didn't have to go and get detention and exile and all the things that the school would have applied. The secrets are made known. And what you do in secret will be made known too. You might think that weird, but listen to Matthew 6:6. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what you have done in secret will reward you. That's the support of that idea. And your fasting and all the other things. You don't do it publicly, but you will be acknowledged. You'll be rewarded by God. That's deal 2. The bad guys are exposed. Happy? You obviously have no bad guys in your life. Deal 3. Do not be afraid, again, of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Instead, fear the one who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Killing of the body, I don't think it's that much of a problem because it's going to run out of steam anyway, isn't it? Some of us exit earlier than others and we miss them terribly. But the point is, the return policy is out of this world. There was a guy talking to a cartoon of a guy talking to a vicar saying, you know, your superannuation doesn't look good, but you've got your ultimate returns are out of this world, you know? Good reward. The body will be renewed. You will hand in your old but faithful body, a bit like adverts for an old car, you know, it was faithful, but I can't use it anymore. And then you will receive a refund of a good one that lasts forever. Isn't that interesting? Even a crucified body, or a body burnt at the stake for them, like Polycarp, would be replaced by a new eternal body. The resurrection of the dead is part of our creed. I believe in the resurrection of the dead, the resurrection of the body specifically. It will be a new body, just as Jesus' body was different. You know, he could appear in locked rooms, but he still ate fish. He was in that transition between this world and the future kingdom of perfection. The support verse for that, one of many, is 1 Corinthians 15, 42, 43. So will it be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable, it is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. That's deal 3. Deal 4, Matthew 10:29, if you're following. Aren't 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. Even all the hairs on your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable than many sparrows. In Luke, in the similar account in Luke, it's changed slightly. You get a better deal. You can get 5 sparrows for 2 pennies. So that's just interesting. And here's the joke. This is a joke, okay? Don't get upset. Oh, ye balding one. He is up to date. Or should I say, he's got you covered. It's just a crazy idea, you know, that he doesn't actually count them. They are numbered. He knows. It's a picture of, the vast, immense ability of God to know all things, which makes it even more amazing that we can call him Father, doesn't it? But you are incredibly more precious, much more precious than the sparrows, he says. And God has his eyes on the sparrows. Now, the sparrows then were not the sparrows today. Okay, they were slightly bigger birds, but it's a word for kind of a common bird that shows up everywhere. But they're a little bigger today. People could actually eat them. So they were traded, or they could be used in sacrifice, which, I'm not particularly comfortable with because I like sparrows particularly, but anyway, that's another story. Not only will the truth be out of the liars and gossipers, but your faithfulness will be noted because he sees everything, and you are more precious than you actually believe. And that's so important to take that on board, because so often there are people in life who crush us with negative things about who we aren't and who we won't be. It can happen through teachers, it can happen through parents, it can happen through friends who kind of rubbish us and say you're hopeless. My most ingenious university professor who supervised one of my study programs was told in about year 4 that he'd be sweeping the streets because he couldn't read properly. And then he discovered he was dyslexic, and he became this amazing professor who painted, who sang, who did incredible things. One teacher can say something really terrible. Fortunately, there are thousands of teachers who build them up all the time. And turn that around. So you are precious, you're important, you matter, you can do it, you'll get through. Let me help you, let me support you. Don't be afraid, you are known to God. And ultimately, the last one, whoever acknowledges me before people, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. For the persecuted church, this was an inspiration with huge hope added. It was the super bargain of the century. They too were precious and valued. And it was a huge risk to follow Jesus. It was actually all or nothing for them. It would be a hard choice when others you love chose not to follow. Families would be divided. Now, the most difficult passage, I think, is verse 34 onwards. Would you like to look at that together? If you've got a Bible, you've got your notices, it's printed in the notices. This is probably one of the most challenging passages in this chapter. Do not think that I have come to bring peace onto the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And the man's enemies will be the members of his household. This is a really different Jesus, isn't it? Guess where that comes from? The local paper of the day? The internet of the day? No. The Bible. It's a direct quote from Micah 7:6. Jesus is quoting the scriptures, and in that passage in Micah 7, they were being warned of the consequences of what it would be like to turn away from God. And that was what it would be like for them then. And Jesus is simply applying the same thing. It's all or nothing. You have to be committed. Mark talks about a covenant. The thing about a covenant is that, if you break it, somehow God doesn't break his covenant with us. He always keeps the deal. We're still his children when we mess up. We really are. I mean, you can have the most interesting children in the world, and I say that using interesting in a very broad term. People are interesting when they're really different, and different too. Even if your children are that interesting, so complicated, you still love them, whatever they do. Hello? Yep. Anybody with me? Yep. Thanks. No. So, following Jesus asks the question, who do you value more and what do you value more? Who do you value more? Who do you love more? Elsewhere, Jesus says, where your heart is, that's where your treasure will be. When the greatest commandment before Jesus came was love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, surely Jesus is linking that up to us too when he says, love one another as I have loved you. Total love, total commitment. His love for us is expressed in his willingness to die for us. It's only a parent that would, if they could, save their child's life and lose their own. It's unlikely to be a stranger that would do that. When a stranger does it, they are given medals as heroes. You notice that? But parents have a natural desire to do that. If you love your parents, or your job, or your philosophy, or way of thinking, or the way you describe your life and your purpose in living, if you love it more than Jesus, it's a problem. Now, to say not worthy of me sounds really odd. Tom Wright has his own translation of the New Testament, which I quite enjoy. It's called the Kingdom New Testament. Robin knows it. And that's the only book I've replaced from the flood in my office. Because the others I said, I can't afford it. I totaled up $1,000. The two racks at the bottom, it's $1,000 to replace that lot. 60 books. I said, I'll go for Tom Wright. Good choice, eh? In his translation, he says this. He says, they don't deserve me. It's a little softer, you see. But it's stark, because in those days it was all or nothing. And that's why when it says you have to take up your cross at the end, in verse 28, whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life because of me will find it. All of that is about the value of things. And the cross particularly. The cross was actually a revolutionary symbol for Christians. It was a sign of passive resistance and implicit revolt. Why? Because the cross was the Romans' only power against them. That's the worst they could do. And they used to crucify hundreds. They were on the streets, sometimes between two towns. There would be people, Christians, crucified all the way down the road. It was brutal. They take that and they make that the symbol of love. And that is just really a statement of revolt against the Roman Empire. Somebody understands and smiles. I'd say, oh dear, be more concerned about that than the fact that God tells you He loves you, and that you're worthy, and that you matter. And that following Him is still a wonderful thing, even if it's risky. Because 3 times it says, do not be afraid. In fact, it's one of the most common commandments in the New Testament. It's not be good, be nice to the cat, whatever. Don't be afraid. It comes up all the time. Don't be afraid. They couldn't have any more important words of encouragement and hope back then and for us today. And the many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of Christians who are persecuted today, it gives them great hope. They're not afraid. And God's message is clear to them and to us. Don't be afraid. I've got it. I'm here. I'm with you. One of the famous hymns of the faith by Horatio Spafford is the one that goes like this: it is well with my soul. We don't sing it very often. He was a wealthy businessman in Chicago. He lost much of his real estate in the Great Chicago Fire. And after the fire, he sent his wife and 4 daughters on a ship to Europe, so they were going the other way from the Titanic. And he intended to join them later. He needed a time of rest, and he was also going to help Dwight Moody with a revival in Britain. On that ship, the ship was struck by another iron sailing ship. They didn't have radar in those days. Mind you, ships do that even today. It's quite amazing. And it sank within 12 minutes. Only his wife survived of the family, Anna Spafford. A message from her reached him in the United States. The message included the words, saved alive. So he decided quickly to join his wife. And when they reached the spot where their daughters had drowned as they crossed the ocean, Spafford marked that event with the words of hope, and he wrote the hymn. When peace like a river attends my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. As he understood despite that, God was with him, and he continued to serve the Lord. Matthew 10, Jesus' words in Matthew 10 resound with hope. God knows about everything and everything you have to deal with. And He cares, and He's there, and He loves you. Don't be afraid. Amen. As we close, naturally we're going to sing a song that has a sparrow in it.